How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, giving you guys your weekly forecast of what the heck is going on in the universe for September 24th all the way till October 1st. So I want to start off with saying that this week doesn't really have a whole lot going on. We have more going on next week as Venus begins her retrograde. However, this week don't expect huge things to happen. However, there will be a little bit of subtle changes that are going to kind of have an underlining theme throughout the next couple of weeks. So let's start off with today being Monday. We have the moon going into Aries and having the full moon later on this evening by the time I post this and everything like that. This full moon is going to be conjunct Chiron and it's going to be squaring Saturn. And so this full moon is kind of a lot. It's the harvest moon. We have the moon highlighting Aries where it's highlighting Mars. It's wanting us to take action. It's wanting us to apply things. And we have the sun in Libra where we're wanting to balance out. We're wanting to equal things out. We're wanting to find more of a sense of Venusian energy that we want to express, meaning, having a little bit more value, being a little bit more tamed and calm and kind of relaxing our way into the fall. Now, as we have this full moon, it is going to be squaring Saturn exactly. And this is a pretty big deal because as Saturn is now direct, he's in Capricorn where he's going to be for the next little while. He's having us do a lot of work. Saturn is really about discipline, efficiency, effectivity. What are you doing to make things work, to make things grow, to have structure, to really have things be bounded by something? And so when we see Saturn right in the middle of this, squaring the moon, squaring the sun, while this moon is kind of like bringing up awareness of not only what kind of makes us angry in that Mars aspect and that moon being in an Aries type stuff situation, but really where do we want to channel this energy? What is going to give us some more grounds to work off? What's going to help us structure ourselves a little bit more and where we need to structure ourselves? Where is this going to kind of apply in a sense where Saturn's in Capricorn where it wants us to kind of build something, it wants us to have some structure, wants us to have a lot of discipline and focus on that. It's going to kind of have us draw back from, the more feeling and expressing the full moon in Aries where it's kind of like we can feel angry, we want to go, we are supercharged with stuff. Saturn's like, are you doing this in a way that's going to be efficient? Are you doing this in a way that's really going to get your quote unquote shit together? So this full moon's kind of kicking off the week with this very, very serious tone. So don't get too, I don't want to say upset about it. It's going to be kind of, what's a good word? Like, it's going to want us, I'm trying to think of a word that's like not exciting. Like, it's going to have a fuel to our fire to want to start going about things in a different way. Later on Tuesday, and I'm bringing this up now because as the sun squares Saturn and we have Mars conjuncting the South Node for the last time, this is kind of bringing that full moon in Aries effect to the real deal. So as Mars goes through the South Node for its third time in this retrograde cycle, it's kind of an interesting thing. We've been over this part a couple times where Mars is about releasing, tearing away, it wants to inflammate, it causes stress, it causes anger. It's in the Saturn-ruled sign of Aquarius where it's kind of getting frustrated with how things are being connected, how things are kind of working together. You can feel yourself kind of being isolated or alienated from a certain idea or group or something like that. But as the South Node's been right there, it's been kind of like, hey, we've built upon this before, we've done this before, maybe it's time to move on to something else. And as Mars conjuncts the South Node for the third time, this is kind of like that last and final straw of like, you know what, I am kind of done with this. I think it's time to move forward. I think it's time to do something different and something that's going to be more efficient, be more effective, stuff that's under Saturn's terms. So just keep that in mind, especially as on Tuesday as well, the sun will be squaring Saturn. So that day is going to have a very Saturn theme to begin with. As the sun squares Saturn, where the sun is in fall in Libra, and I find that as no coincidence as we go into fall. As the sun's in Libra, where it wants things to kind of chill out, wants things to be a little bit nicer and easier, but the sun's this roaring flame of ball of energy, of nuclear explosions. It wants to, fuel, it wants to create light. And as it's starting to dim down, that energy of having that, I don't want to say self-expression, but the sun being kind of like our light, kind of like how we come off, how we just kind of, what energy we kind of emanate. As it's in Libra where, it's kind of wanting to go back and forth, it's wanting to be complacent, it's wanting to chill out. As it squares Saturn, it's kind of like, is that really worth it? Is chilling out kind of worth it? Is it, do we need to do something else? Do we need to have more structure? Do we need to have more discipline? Do we need to focus on something else? So as Tuesday comes along, it is going to be kind of like a moving forward energy, although it may feel kind of like sluggish in a sense. Moving forward onto Wednesday, we do have the moon conjuncting Uranus as it's still in the last degrees of Aries. And so this is still kind of like highlighting that, all right, like this, we still want to move forward, even though it's kind of like, it's not that we don't have the energy for it, it's just that getting the motivation to go up and do it is one other thing. So as the moon goes into the last degrees of Aries and it starts getting closer and closer to Uranus, we're going to start feeling that motivation coming back alive again. And Chiron will be also retrograding back into Pisces on Wednesday. And I think this is also going to be really interesting because Chiron's been in Aries for the past couple months, where that healing situation of Chiron, where it's wanting to teach us a lesson, it's wanting to show us what pain is and wanting us to choose happiness, choose healing over that. And as Chiron's been in Aries, it's really been focused on our actions. It's really been focused on our drive and our determination to accomplish. And as it goes back into Pisces, it kind of comes back down to, do we really have that sense of belief? Can we connect all the dots of, like understanding it on an emotional and an intellectual and a passionate level of like, hey, what other healing do we need in this area of emotions, of our psyche and stuff like that, in order to continue on with having the motivation and the drive to keep moving forward? So as Chiron retrogrades back into Pisces, we're going to start having a lot more of a healing understanding, more in that subconscious factor, more in the dream realm, more of the emotional, intellectual, spiritual, all combined. So that is going to be an underlying tone. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but Chiron will be there for a little while until it goes back into Aries later on in I forgot when, to be honest with you. It's in my video, but I totally forgot when. Moving forward, on Thursday, we have the moon going into Taurus, and it's going to be right next to Uranus. It's going to be opposing Venus and opposing Jupiter. Actually, my bad. Opposing Venus and squaring Mars. Still highlighting that Mars square Uranus and Mars square Venus thing that's still going on. As the moon goes into Taurus, though, it's going to feel a lot more grounded. It's going to feel a lot more, we're going to feel a lot more established in that full moon stuff. Kind of, where are we taking this? What's kind of coming out of this? What's manifesting out of this? As it opposes Venus, though, as Venus gets really, really close to stationing retrograde, this is kind of looking at what do we really value, what do we want to have, and what does that really look like in terms of letting go of stuff. It is squaring Mars, where it's kind of like, the things that we're kind of emotionally focusing on, that we want to possess, that we want to hold, that we have a lot of value in, maybe also kind of holding us back from, going on to something else, moving on from, something that was in our past. And that's still that whole Mars retrograde, or I shouldn't say retrograde, in shadow energy stuff. But as the moon conjuncts Uranus and has that opposition to Venus, it should be a little bit easier to kind of like, maybe I don't want this anymore. I'm totally okay with letting go of this, or not having this, or putting more of my value into this materialized thing that I have, rather than this, not necessarily hopes and dreams stuff, but more of what you're kind of holding on to in an emotional level. So as we go into Friday, the moon will then start its opposition to Jupiter, where then it starts coming a little bit more philosophical with those decisions, where as the moon's in Taurus, where it wants us to stabilize, and wants us to ground, and wants us to have things, it's opposing Jupiter, where it's kind of like, is this really what I want? Is this really what I value? Is this really, Jupiter and Scorpio is kind of interesting, because where we have all of this philosophical ideas of positivity and stuff in the sign of Scorpio, that's really about like the intense things. It's kind of like, yeah, you know what? This is something I really want. This is something I really value, and I'm dedicated to having this, and I will have this, versus, I have this, and maybe this is still not in alignment with my truth. This still, even though I possess this still may not be rewarding me in the way that I really want to. So as the moon opposes Jupiter, it is kind of a day to kind of get philosophical about things in a really existential way, not necessarily, getting super out there and getting lost in your thoughts, but still doing what you're doing on an everyday basis, but just kind of think about stuff for a little while. As we go into not Friday, that was Friday. Also on Friday, I forgot to mention, Sun trines Mars. So as we had this whole, Mars cycle that we've been having, as it had oh my gosh, I cannot speak today. As it has had its opposition, it had its opposition to the Sun, and now it's making its trine to the Sun. So where we had this conflict of dilemma of like, where are we, what are we pursuing, and what do we want to bring light to? What do we want to emanate? What is our kind of our current energy? We had a little bit of a conflict there. But as Mars is now in Aquarius, where it's going direct and it's trining the Sun in Libra, it's finally like, okay, now I know what I need to express. Now I know how I need my beingness to be in order to kind of align myself in my action. So that is going to be a nice day to kind of get yourself in the routine you really want to, or get yourself in the pursuit that you kind of want to. Moving forward onto Saturday, Saturday does get pretty busy. Saturday, we have the moon entering Gemini. Emotionally, we're starting to think a little bit more, wanting to have different ideas, communicating, stuff like that. The moon in Gemini is a very chatty time. It's a very, our minds are going to be thinking a little bit more about things, a little bit more rationally rather than, irrationally. So as the moon goes into Gemini, it's going to be trining Mars and it's going to be trining Sun. This is a really nice day. This is kind of like, we finally kind of got it all together. We got all the right ideas together to go, this is what I'm thinking, this is how I'm being, this is what I want to apply. So you're going to find your thoughts and your beingness and your actions kind of all in a line in a sense. So it's a really nice day to, I don't want to say pursue something, with rigorous, attention, but really just, playing it in your mind, having the intellectual idea of this is what I'm doing, this is how I'm being, this is where I'm going. So keep that in mind. On Saturday, we also have Venus hitting 10 degrees Scorpio, where she doesn't go to 11 degrees. I believe she stations at 51 or 52 minutes Scorpio, or 10 degrees, I should say. As she hits 10 degrees and she starts slowing down a lot more, and she stays at that 10 degrees level for a lot, you're going to see a lot of this Venus energy starting to slow down in Scorpio, where it's okay, I want these things, I want this direct specific thing, and it's not coming, it's staying basically right there where it needs to be. And as Venus starts to go retrograde later on next week is when you'll see that process kind of reverse in a sense, where it's in order to get where you want to go, you're going to have to backtrack and go around in a different way. Long story short, as Venus hits 10 degrees Scorpio, you're going to start seeing that Venus energy of what we really value, the whole relationship thing, the whole love and intimacy, the whole money thing, just kind of come to a weird, not necessarily halt, but you're going to start to see these themes that play up and stay where they're at. So as we move on to Sunday, the moon is going to then trine Mercury. It will be making a square to Neptune. And as the moon squares Neptune, it's kind of don't get confused over things. Don't overthink it. If it's not that deep. Don't go too deep into it, because you totally can. As it trines Mercury, though, really look at, really look at with Mercury and Libra. It's okay, what do we need to, level out? What's right? What's wrong? What's fair? What's peace? What's justice? And stuff like that. As Mercury's in Libra, where it's we got to find the balance of this stuff. We got to do this in a way that really works with one another, that brings a lot of peace, that brings a lot of equality, that has a lot of diplomacy to it. As the moon starts to trine Mercury and square Neptune, don't get too lost in everything. Just make sure that you are thinking about everything and you're talking about everything in a very calm, mannered, civil way. Then going into Monday, by this time next week, we have the moon ingressing into Cancer, and then it's going to be opposing Saturn and squaring the sun. So this is when it gets kind of interesting again, as the moon goes into Cancer and we really start to feel these emotions that we've been feeling, really start to understand what trusting this universe is, trusting the process, trusting ourselves is. It's opposing Saturn, where it's we have to establish this trust, we have to establish this emotional connection, this emotional nurturing that we need in order to pursue these Saturn results of this is what we need to accomplish, this is what needs to get done. It's kind of when you go into work on a really bad day, sometimes you do, break down and cry in the middle of work, you got so much life stuff going on. But when you step into work, you got to do everything you can to just take off whatever, is going on in your outside world. You got to take that off and go into work mode. And that really is an emotional process of, I need to focus on my work. I need to get this done. And I'm going to trust the process. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to think about it. There's nothing I can do about it right now as I go into work. So I might as well just trust everything, feel it out and keep going. So that's what this week's looking like, especially as we go into next week. Like I said, nothing really too big is happening, but a lot of subtle changes, Venus is hitting 10 degrees, Mars is finally leaving the South Node conjunction for the last time, and Chiron's going back into Pisces. There's not a whole lot going on this week, but I do think that you're going to start to see a very underlying change in plot, a very underlying change in in the theme. I think it's also interesting too, here in Denver, the leaves are all changing, everything's kind of changing very subtly, even though it's still kind of hot. It's not snowing yet or anything like that. So that's what I got for you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching all my videos, liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, whatever it is that you do. I absolutely love all you guys, and I will be seeing you guys very soon and next week.